Conmen, the most enigmatic of the criminal fraternity. These expert liars and consummate manipulators use their intoxicating charm to prey upon the most prized human trait, trust, in order to make money and ravage lives. Join us as we explore the lives and minds of some of the world's most notorious con men and women, exposing their shocking crimes, their twisted psychology, and how their cruel lies led to their eventual downfall. In this show, the con man who bided his time and patiently used love as his weapon to con a woman called Christine Handy out of £500,000.
The relationship felt really real. Not for 1 minute did I think there was anything wrong with it.
He presents himself as a well-educated, aristocratic figure, and once people start to buy into that, that's when he then starts to look to get money from them.
One part of the con was posing as a member of the Rothschild banking dynasty, and experts, such as forensic psychologist Kerry Danes, will expose, step by step, how he achieved his heartless goal.
This man doesn't appear to have any scruples, any morals.
Just how can a perfect stranger infiltrate your life and destroy it, financially and emotionally from within?
I look back and I just think, did I really do that? Did I really believe and trust him so much?
The 23rd of June 2003 was no different to any other Monday morning in Cheltenham for newly single mother of three Christine Handy.
It was Monday morning. I dropped the children off at school and then was heading to work, but I had an hour to kill. So I decided I'd stop and have a cup of coffee. Sat down, read the paper. Somebody approached me and asked me if they could join my table. And I said yes and carried on reading my newspaper. And then when I looked up, realised all the other tables were empty. He'd actually come to talk to me. He said that he'd noticed me on a number of occasions and he thought I looked interesting.
Sorry, I'm Alex Harrigan.
And the conversation continued between Christine and the mysterious gentleman.
He told me his name was Leonardo Di Caprio. He asked me what I was doing. I said I was on my way to work. I asked him what he was doing. He said he'd come into Cheltenham because he always does his banking on a Monday. I asked him what he did for a living. He told me he was a financial consultant. I just took him at his word. He fitted the profile of a financial consultant. He was very well dressed, you know, he'd got his briefcase.
And Alexander de Arakan showed an interest in Christine and her life.
I told him, you know, I did go there every Monday, had a cup of coffee on my way to work. It was my son's birthday the next day, so I was in a rush to leave. So I didn't spend a great deal of time chatting to him. 10 minutes, and I left. I didn't think I'd see him again, it was just being polite to somebody.
This meeting was very organic, very natural. So you meet this stranger who shows an interest in you in a coffee shop. You know, that seems innocuous enough, doesn't it? I don't think that most people would think, oh my gosh, this man might be a criminal, and warning bells would start ringing.
Over her cup of coffee with a stranger, Christine had innocently mentioned her Monday morning routine, and he had listened.
When I returned on the following Monday, he was sat there waiting for me. So I joined him and we chatted. I talked about my life and the children and the fact that I was going through a divorce. Just generally having a conversation, getting to know somebody.
So because this is the second meeting, there's a feeling of familiarity. You feel safe and secure, you're in a public place. This is not your lifelong friend, but it's somebody that you feel that you know, and you're more likely to get to know them a little bit more. Your guard comes down.
Christine enjoyed Alexander de Arakan's company, but she was going through the process of a divorce, and romance was the last thing on her mind.
I wasn't looking for a relationship at the time. I was just finding my feet, really, of living the life of a single mother, and because it's quite time-consuming with 3 children.
But the man Christine had met was charming, kind and fascinating.
He told me that he was one of those children from the 70s, that he was 15 and he was a very intelligent 15-year-old and got a place in Oxford. And it is something I'd read about. And he certainly struck me as somebody who was very intelligent, interesting, talked about his career. He'd worked for investment banks in London. Very accomplished man, really.
But the reality was the very accomplished man was actually a very accomplished con man.
He's slowly and steadily dripping bits of information to her, so he's building up this mythology in a way that's really quite convincing. So this is very effective grooming, it's very effective manipulation, and so within time he's going to have her exactly where he wants her.
But Christine could not have imagined that the man she had only met twice would go on and utterly destroy her life in the cruelest way possible.
It's just somebody walks into your life, just steals 3 years of it.
In June 2003, recently separated single mother Christine Handy had randomly met a man called Alex in her local coffee shop. She could never have imagined that she was being groomed by a con man called Marc Hatton, who had already served time in prison for fraud. And after 2 meetings, the con man was ready to make his next move.
On the 3rd meeting, I turned up and he'd actually bought me a coffee. The coffee was sat on the table waiting for me. We sat down and we chatted, and it was at that point he asked me if he could have my phone number, which I said no. He seemed very offended by that. And then he turned around and said, well, I'll give you mine then, and if you want to ring me and we could go out for a drink.
And the con man's manipulation worked.
I then felt guilty that, I don't know why, that, I wasn't trusting him. So I gave him my phone number, and just as I got to work he was phoning me. And said he really liked meeting me and he'd like to take me out for a drink, and I said, oh, I'll think about it.
And the romantic pursuit continued.
He rang me a second time and said, let's go out for dinner. And I didn't feel secure. I don't know why I didn't feel secure. I didn't feel secure about going out for dinner with a man I didn't know in the evening. So I suggested that maybe we went out for lunch or a drink early evening.
Christine had no idea she had arranged a date with a con man.
On our first date, we went to a little wine bar in Cheltenham. It was in a basement and it was a summer evening. We were sat having a chat and he suddenly produced his passport, which I thought was very odd, and said, oh, I brought this to show you.
And the passport revealed Christine's date was a member of the Rothschild family.
His name was Dr. Alexander Mark Alphonsus Nathaniel de Rothschild de Arakan Hatton. It's quite a mouthful, isn't it? That's what's on his passport.
The reality was the con man's name was Marc Hatton, and no one knows how he was able to obtain a passport with this fictional name. But he wanted Christine to believe that he was Alexander de Rothschild, a member of the illustrious banking dynasty. Little did Christine know, Marc Hatton's story was a tried and tested hook to draw his victims into his con.
The story he told about his parentage was that he was the illegitimate son of Edmund de Rothschild and a female by the name of Christina Ong, and that he'd been adopted as a young boy, and that was how he came to be brought back to the UK.
Hatton's Rothschild story combined glamour and mystery with rejection, heartache and abandonment.
He was a very emotional man, and he pretended to be very hurt by his family background, and that was quite a good tactic, really, when you think about it, because it stops you asking questions.
Christine already thinks that Hatton, or Alex as she knows him, is somebody who's kind, attentive and caring, but now he's building on that and he's portraying himself as also really quite exotic and, more importantly, very emotionally vulnerable. So I'm sure that she felt some sense of affinity with him because she'd just come out of a divorce. But by presenting this bogus backstory of himself, he really was making it more and more likely that he would be able to manipulate her and would eventually be able to take her money.
Marc Hatton is in no way related to the Rothschild family, and despite the grand gesture with the passport, the Rothschild story was not the reason Christine was attracted to her date.
Oh, he's very charming, and he's very kind, and he was very humble. Sorry, I'm smiling. I just find it hard to match the two together now. But I think that was the thing that I liked about him. He just seemed enormously kind.
He practices what's known as sweetheart scams. And the sweetheart scam is any scam which revolves around making someone fall for you. And in a way, they're the cruelest scam because you end up, not only with an empty bank account, but with a broken heart as well.
And Christine was hooked in by the conman. After their first date, many more followed.
I saw him a lot. He phoned a lot. And that was a big part in our relationship, phone calls. I mean, he could ring 20 times a day.
And they also spent more and more time together.
So he'd come, we'd spend the day together. Children were in school, we'd spend the day together. We'd go out for lunch or... and then he'd sort of disappear for a couple of days. I've got to go to London, I've got some meetings, I need to get sponsorship for the London Business School.
The reality was that Hatton was sowing the seeds of his con, combining romance with his talk of the London Business School. Christine Handy was unwittingly being groomed.
A few months into the relationship, we were dating regularly. He'd met my children, we'd all gone to the cinema together. I met his sister for coffee. He'd met friends of mine. It just seemed like a normal relationship.
The conman played the role of the perfect partner who had fallen head over heels for Christine.
He was very full on. He'd never met a woman like me, and he loved me. He wanted me to be his wife. And I'm just thinking, well, this is going a bit fast. He was saying how much he wanted to get married and have a family of his own, and he never actually asked me. He never said, will you marry me? He just talked that we would get married.
The conman had convinced Christine he loved her. Hatton was also pretending he had a place at the prestigious London Business School to do an MBA, but he was struggling to secure funding for the course.
For quite a few months I'd been watching him going off to London, trying to get sponsorship for his London Business School, and he'd return back and he'd be deflated, he couldn't raise the money, and it just went on and on and on. And I think that started in the September, so by the time we got to November, he just seemed completely flattened, and he was hoping to start the course in the January. He was running out of time. Hand in hand with the fictional woes with the London Business School came another lie. A lie that implied once Alexander de Rothschild completed his MBA, the couple's future together would be bright. The story was that he'd been headhunted. This bank in Switzerland had offered him a job. He was sort of holding them back. He wasn't quite sure he wanted to go back into banking. The months rolled on. He took a few trips to Geneva, telling me he'd gone for interviews and to meet the board of directors, and they were very keen for him to join them. The job of a lifetime in Switzerland was dependent on the MBA at the London Business School. But the Rothschild rogue was claiming he could not secure funding to cover the fees. Marc Hatton had created a complex web of lies, and slowly but steadily had ensnared Christine. I think in the October I started to think, I really love this guy. I mean, he's just do anything for me, and he's so nice to me, and the kids seemed to like him when they did see him. He started then going on about how he wanted a family of his own, and I said I didn't want any more children. I was 38 at the time. I then started getting the tears of how he's obviously the illegitimate son of Edmund de Rothschild, so he's adopted, he doesn't have a real family. He wanted a family of his own, and the greatest gift I could give him was a child. The reality was there was another gift the conman wanted more than a child. It was then also the time that he said about I really need to get into the London Business School, can you help me? And he seemed to be really getting down about it, to the point that he would actually sit and just cry and saying it's so difficult. As soon as they realise that I'm a de Rothschild, they just assume I've got the money to do the course. I said, well, I wasn't in a position to help him because my divorce settlement hadn't finalised, but he knew it was all going on in the background.
The passport, the Rothschild backstory, the job in Switzerland, the stories of the London Business School, and the endless I love yous over the past 6 months had led Christine to this point. This is what Marc Hatton had been working towards. He had put in the groundwork, and now he wanted to see a return, a £75,000 return.
And I just said, I can't help you. And he said, but you could. And I said, I don't have any money. And he said, yeah, but you've got your house.
I need the money.
Well, I haven't got the money, I've told you that.
Is there a way we can get funding for the house?
Because we were going to be, at that stage, we were talking about getting married and he'd got this job in Switzerland. So you're going to have to sell your house in maybe a year or 2 years' time. So that's what I arranged to do. I put a charge on the house and lent him the money for the course. By the time I got the money to him, that was in the December of 2003. Everything seemed normal. Come the January, he started at London Business School. He'd have all his books and his suitcases and his computers.
He never at any time enrolled on a course or paid for any courses at the London Business School. And on the bank statements you can clearly see that when that amount of money goes into his account, he then goes on a massive spending spree, buying lavish goods and designer clothes.
Hatton spent every penny. But there was more money to be mined from Christine. And the cruel con man was not prepared to give up his sweetheart scam until he had taken everything.
Now clearly for Christine Handy there were no warning signs that actually Hatton was just using her. When we're in love with somebody, what happens is the halo effect. You only see the good in your partner and you just ignore the bad things. But it's interesting that it wasn't just Christine that was taken in by Hatton. Her friends and her family also didn't think there was anything amiss with this gentleman, even though he didn't want to move in to live with her.
Marc Hatton never moved in with Christine because he needed quiet to study for his fictional MBA. But he convinced Christine that he would live with her when they started a family together.
At the time I'm thinking, I do love this man and we are going to get married. And, you know, he's only asking for what other people want when they're in a relationship. And I did have 3 children from my marriage. So I can't deny him the right to be a father if he's, you know, with husband and wife. So I did succumb to his manipulation.
In March 2004, Christine discovered she was pregnant with the con man's child.
The day I found out, I phoned him, thinking he was going to be really excited.
I've got something really important to tell you. I'm pregnant.
And there was just total silence.
Alex, are you there?
And I'm filled with dread because I'm thinking, but this is what he wanted. And I felt confused. And I said to him, but, you know, isn't this what you wanted? Oh, yeah, I'm just a bit stunned. I'm excited, yeah. He said, just wasn't expecting it, and covered his tracks, really. I now realise. And then he said, I'll come and see you. And I'm thinking, oh, he is pleased. Oh, good, at long last he is pleased. It took him 2 days to come and see me. And I was a bit taken aback. Why so long? Oh, I've just been so busy, and, you know, I've been thinking about it and trying to digest the fact that, you know, I'm going to be a father and we can have a family.
We're having a baby.
Whether Marc Hatton's wish for a baby with Christine was a bluff that got called will never be known for sure. But now pregnant, Marc Hatton cruelly had Christine in the most vulnerable position imaginable, and he would mercilessly take full advantage of that power. It would be 2 more years of heartless lies and empty promises before Christine's world would come tumbling down, and she would learn the shocking and sick truth about the father of her child. Single mother of 3 Christine Handy had been in a relationship with Alexander de Rothschild since the summer of 2003. The con man, who was really called Marc Hatton, had already duped her out of £75,000 by convincing her he loved her. In 2004, she believed she had made him the happiest man on earth when she discovered she was pregnant with his child.
He was saying he was going to move in, and obviously you're busy with the other 3 children and I'll help out, and don't lift this and let me do that, and I'll be here Wednesday and I'll change the light bulbs for you. And Wednesday would come and I'd have to change them myself, and I sort of got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I'm still humping bin bags out of the kitchen bin because no one else is around to help me. And it did get quite difficult, and it did cause a problem in the relationship because he was saying he'd be there and he'd do things for me, and I'd just find myself on my own all the time with 3 children and, heavily pregnant.
Alex, will you speak to me? I need some help.
And when problems arose, Marc Hatton was able to deviously manipulate Christine, ensuring he had complete control.
He would turn it on me, saying, "Oh, but I'm doing this for our future. You've got to be more understanding. Don't be so selfish." He used to tell me I was hysterical a lot, to the point that I remember picking up the phone one day and ringing my sister and saying, "Di, would you describe me as a hysterical woman?" And she said, "You're the least hysterical person I know." But it's like a worm in your head being with somebody like him. They feed these little snippets, and they say it often enough that you start doubting yourself.
Marc Hatton was blinding Christine with manipulative mind games to con her out of thousands of pounds. But the persona of a hard-working family man also concealed the double life he was living.
During their relationship, he never actually lived with Mrs. Handy. It was established that he was in fact living with another woman in Cirencester for the majority of it. He saw Mrs. Handy as a meal ticket, if you like, and that he was pursuing her purely for financial gain.
The con man promised Christine everything but delivered nothing. In fact, when the time came for Christine to give birth to Hatton's son Marcus, the con man was nowhere to be seen. And when he eventually turned up, Hatton even took the opportunity to make money from an exhausted Christine.
I have to say, I think back now and I laugh. He turned up with a bunch of flowers he bought at the hospital with the plastic wrapper around it and gave them to me, and I thought, and he held his son and he cried, and it just seemed normal. I went on, freshened myself up and came back, and he was just about to leave. He said, "I'm going to go into town, I need to buy some bits and pieces for you and Marcus." And he said, "Oh, by any chance you haven't got 20 quid, have you?" He said, "I didn't have any money to pay for those flowers." He said, "So I've got to pay for them on the way out." So not only had I just given birth to his son, I ended up having to pay for my own flowers. When Marcus was born, he did stay at my house for, I think it was 2 nights, might have been 3 nights. And again, looking back, he couldn't wait to get out.
How somebody could live with a person, be intimate with a person, father a baby with a person, and create a life that's actually just hinged on their desire to take money from that person. I think that it says that Hatton is psychopathic because he's clearly got no empathy. He's emotionally colourblind, if you like. He just simply can't feel what he's doing to Christine, because if he could, he wouldn't be able to do it.
Christine had a baby to care for, along with 3 other children. The new mum was exhausted and vulnerable. And Marc Hatton began the next stage of his con in June 2005.
He turned up at the house, completely panic-stricken. He looked like a rabbit in the headlights. He was scared, he was emotional, very tearful. And I'm saying, "What's going on?" And he said, "They've hit me with a tax bill for £80,000. And he just went on and he was beside himself. And he said, "I really need you to help me." And I said, I can't raise that sort of money. And he said, "Well, there's no choice for it then. I'm going to have to leave the country." And I'm thinking, great, here I am with your son, and he's going to take off. I couldn't let it happen, you know. It's sort of, I felt I had to help him, otherwise I didn't know what was going to happen. And I said I just couldn't raise that sort of money. I could get 50. And he said to me, which was reassuring, a little bit of reassurance, he could raise the other 30.
Christine had previously loaned Hatton £75,000 back in the December of 2003 to cover the fees for his bogus MBA. Now, July 2005 saw her loan him a further £50,000 for his fictional tax bill. All the money was frittered away on luxuries and in designer shops. Throughout their relationship, Hatton had talked about moving to Switzerland with Christine. He then set about persuading Christine to sell her house, arguing that when he took up his Swiss banking job, they would need to move quickly, so it would be best if she lived in rented accommodation.
He started talking about, he was going to sell his house and you should put yours on the market. And that filled me full of dread, because I've got a newborn baby, and I'm just thinking, could I go through all the process of selling a house and moving somewhere else? But he kept saying it was important. He wanted to be able to leave very quickly. If I was in rented accommodation, we could just pack up and go.
This is quite an interesting tactic on his part, because it's a kind of emotional hurrah, in the sense that the hurrah is where you get someone who's already invested to an extent to invest even more. And at this point, bear in mind, Christine really needs him to be telling the truth. The consequences of him being fake are too horrible to contemplate. So that's how he really plays the hurrah in this instance.
It was then in the summer of 2005 that he convinced me it was time to put it on. And because I think we were supposed to be leaving in the January of 2006. So I sold the house, moved into Cirencester, and thinking, well, I got there in the August, so I'm thinking, a few months, come January, we'll be going off to Switzerland.
The move into rented accommodation was temporary as far as Christine was concerned. Once again, Hatton's promises of moving in never materialised. But moving Christine away from the security of Cheltenham not only meant that she had sold her £500,000 home, it also meant that for the first time in their relationship, that Christine was truly at his mercy.
He helped me choose the house, and the house is very remote. And of course, when you're living out there, your friends in Cheltenham are going to just pop in for a cup of coffee like they did here. The door was open, the kettle was on. So I suddenly became very isolated, which was ideal for him.
And isolated, Marc Hatton set about conning the mother of his child out of more money. Now Christine had sold her house, she was sitting on a substantial lump sum, which Hatton was determined to get his hands on, this time using his financial advisor persona.
On the 12th of September, there was £105,000 I wanted him to invest on my behalf with Pictet Bank. Well, his suggestion, Pictet Bank, because I'd never heard of them, but he was investing it anyway. But I still had some money left. I didn't give him everything. And on the 13th of September, I've discovered, only recently, that he'd actually gone and bought himself a brand new BMW with the money.
Although twisted and inhumane, Marc Hatton had expertly manipulated Christine from their first meeting in 2003. Over 2 years later, and the villain had taken almost every penny from his prey with a string of empty promises and the unbelievable extreme of fathering a child simply to make his con believable.
He told Christine Handy he'd secured a job with a Swiss bank and that they would be moving out as a family to Switzerland, but he couldn't tell her what bank it was, as it was top secret, until the news had been broken in the Financial Times. And so he again strung her another set of lies about this promise of a new life in Switzerland.
At this point, Christine is really in an impossible situation. She's invested everything into this man. She's invested everything financially, but also she's very invested emotionally. She has a life with this man. She has a child with this man. She isn't going to want to lose him. She isn't wanting to take that risk.
I look back and I just think, did I really do that? Did I really believe and trust him so much? I'd been jumping through these hoops that he'd set out for me to be a family and be with him, and yet nothing was materialising. All the things that he said he was going to do didn't happen.
The move date to Switzerland of January 2006 came and went, with more excuses and lies, and Christine was left alone and isolated from her friends in Cheltenham.
I think I got to my darkest point, that I just thought, what am I doing? What's going on? And I really felt that I was losing a grip on my life, reality. And I remember thinking, this has got to stop. And the only way I could bring it back into control was to actually go back to Cheltenham, be around my friends and family close by. And that's surprising that I I'd have the courage to just get up and go and take back control of my life.
The relationship was becoming strained. Marc Hatton had taken almost everything from Christine, and she was seeing less and less of the con man. But believing the lies he had painstakingly spun over the last 3 years, Christine still believed their relationship was worth fighting for.
I mean, obviously there were days I'd think to myself, what am I doing with him? And then other days I'd see the man that I'd met and think, well, that's why I'm with him and that's why we have a child together, and I was still prepared to, work at the relationship.
But in June 2006, the con man made a catastrophic error by taking Christine to his brother's home, and Christine hit it off with Hatton's sister-in-law.
I said to her, why don't you come and have coffee with me? Well, the next thing I know is Alexander's saying, why have you invited her here for coffee? And I said, well, because I like her. It seems a friendly thing to do, and, she's going to be my sister-in-law one day. I don't trust her. And he really didn't like it. And I said, well, she's coming. And I told him when she was coming, and then the day she was due, which is the day he'd normally be in London, about half an hour before she arrived, he turned up. He sat here the whole time. And at the time I just thought, that was a bit odd. Why are you here? I didn't mind him being here because he's my partner, but it just, again, was just something odd about it. And he didn't leave until she'd gone.
I don't trust her.
I had a huge row with him that night because he came round and said, I don't want her here. He was saying that they'd always had problems with her. And I said, you can't tell me who to choose as my friends. And, well, if you loved me and you respect me, you do what I ask. And in the end, he left. And I just thought, I'm going to have to phone her and say, look, there's an issue here. I don't know what's going on in your family, but I didn't want to make things worse.
Little did Christine know that when she made that phone call to Hatton's sister-in-law later that week, her world would be utterly destroyed.
Hi, Rose, it's Christine. I rang and told her, which is when then she said to me, are you financially involved with him?
Well, I hope you've not given him any money.
Her words were, if he's a Rothschild, then my husband's Mickey Mouse. And I'm just thinking, God, it's real panic. And at that stage, he was supposed to have been in Geneva, so I couldn't talk to him about what she said. And I had to sit on this information she'd given me for 3 days.
Marc Hatton's sister-in-law told Christine how he had already defrauded a woman in Italy as well as his own brother.
I didn't know who to believe. And eventually he rang me saying he was back from Geneva, so I just put it to him what she'd said. And he just went berserk. I told you. She's a liar. How dare you? How can I trust you? You don't do what I tell you. And in the end, I didn't know what to believe. It was just, I just felt like in this constant state of panic.
After that phone call, Christine didn't see the man who told her he was a Rothschild. He disappeared, and she was left in limbo. Christine desperately needed to know if her partner was in fact a con man, and if she was ever going to be paid back the hundreds of thousands of pounds that she had loaned him. After months of frantically trying to contact him, Hatton eventually turned up at Christine's door.
The last time I saw Alexander was on the 22nd of November 2006, when he stood on the doorstep and said, I think you should go back to your ex-husband until this all blows over.
My ex-husband? Why?
I think I was just stunned, really. I didn't know which way was up.
Marc Hatton would not admit that he had conned Christine, but he did beg her not to go to the police, and promised he would pay the money back in the next 6 months. The horrific truth was becoming clear.
Alex! Alex!
To discover after 3 years that actually you've been living in a fantasy and not a fantasy of your choosing or your making must be absolutely devastating. Christine would have had to have absorbed the fact that not only has she lost financially, but she's also lost one of the most important people in her life.
I didn't know who to turn to and who to talk to. I was worried about, I had no money left and I couldn't pay my rent, so I was doing things like going to the Citizens Advice Bureau about how I could maintain living and looking after the children. I took myself over to the police station and spoke to a police officer there, DC Arkle.
In December 2006, Christine Handy came to the police station to report that she believed she'd been conned out of a substantial amount of money by Mr. Hatton, who she knew at that time as Alexander de Rothschild. The difficulty really was they were in a relationship, and within normal relationships people give each other gifts and lend each other money. So the difficulty with this was proving that he had deceived her to get all or part of this money that she'd given him, and that's why we needed sort of documentary evidence to be able to prove that what he'd told her was in fact a lie.
And I realised then what a slippery little character he was, and I realised that I'd got a lot of work ahead of me to be able to give them a case to work on. And I also had to look at ways of getting my money back, which is, I then decided I would make him bankrupt.
Christine was able to have Hatton declared bankrupt in July 2007, which opened up his accounts to close scrutiny. And as soon as the police were able to compare Christine's bank statements with Marc Hatton's, it became clear exactly what he had done with the money.
He would just go on what appeared to be a massive spending spree as soon as the money went into his account, mainly in areas such as Bond Street, places like Harrods, Ralph Lauren, or top designer shops, and he would be spending thousands of pounds a day. And that pattern of spending would just continue until all of the money was gone and his account was once again in the red.
There was a strong case against Marc Hatton, but the con man had vanished.
He was circulated as wanted, and inquiries were made with airlines to see if we could establish if he had left the country. But at the same time, Mrs. Handy had set up a website called youbetrayedme.com, which I think she'd set up to warn other women of what had happened to her.
Christine had been conned in the worst way imaginable, but she was not prepared to play the role of the victim. Rather than admit defeat, Christine Handy fought back.
So I had to put my story out there to bring up his profile, so I could get some idea, if anyone saw him, they could notify me, to warn other women if he was doing the same thing in London or anywhere else.
She wanted to actually get a little bit of control back. She wanted to be able to recuperate a bit of self-esteem, really. And so I imagine that that's why she went to the lengths that she did in order to fight back.
So, with the website up and running, all Christine could do was wait.
I got quite a few emails from people saying how sorry they were. And then one day I got 3 emails, all from the same family in Mount Kisco in New York, saying that he was there and he was doing the same thing.
The family had become concerned that the illegitimate Rothschild the wealthy divorcee was living with was not who he said he was.
The son became suspicious about him and put his name into a search engine and found Mrs. Handy's website and contacted Mrs. Handy to tell her that this man was living with his mother in her very expensive home in New York.
We informed the police where he was, and they said, right, we have to apply for an international arrest warrant and we have to apply for an extradition order, by which time he will have moved on.
And that was not an option for Christine. She headed to New York with a friend for moral support. Armed with the bankruptcy papers, determined to confront the con man.
When we arrived in New York, we arranged to meet Gil Alba, the private investigator who we'd employed to put him under surveillance.
The private detective took Christine to a local gym that Hatton visited most mornings.
So we saw him coming out in his shorts, and I got out the car then and walked over towards him. I just said to him, "Remember me?" And he looked at me and he said, "Don't do this, Chrissy." And again, it put me on a back foot, and I'm thinking, do what? I haven't done anything. I'm just trying to get you to answer some questions. He walked off and I just shouted, "Here's the bankruptcy papers, I'll put them on the windscreen for when you come out."
Marc Hatton now knew that he had not beaten Christine, and days later she discovered he had been arrested by the FBI.
Oh my God, that's brilliant news.
But little did Christine know that back in the UK there was another warrant for Hatton's arrest, and this charge was even more sick and twisted than the living hell he had put her through.
That did turn my world upside down. That was really difficult. I felt so much guilt just by association. Sorry.
In April 2008, Marc Hatton had been extradited back to the UK from the USA. For 3.5 years, he conned Christine Handy that she was his partner, she had his child, and loaned and trusted him with hundreds of thousands of pounds. However, the abhorrent way in which Marc Hatton had treated Christine was overshadowed by new allegations.
Mr. Hatton was charged with various offences of rape and sexual assault. Due to the seriousness of those offences, the trial for those matters took precedence over the fraud trial, and therefore they took place. In May 2009, he was found guilty of those offences.
The entire time Marc Hatton had been manipulating Christine Handy, he had actually been living with another woman. Monstrously, Marc Hatton had raped and sexually abused the woman's young daughter while she was between the ages of 13 and 17. When the teenager was 15, the con man paid for her to abort his child. At the same time, Christine Handy was pregnant with his son Marcus. Christine now had to face the reality that she had not only invited a con man into her home and heart, she had also invited a paedophile.
The day he was found guilty on all the charges of rape and indecent assault, that did turn my world upside down. That was really difficult. A, because I'd had him in my home and I have a daughter. I've got Marcus, and how do you protect his son, my son, from that? I felt so much guilt just by association. Sorry. I'd taken him into my children's school. He used to come with me when I picked the children up. It was hard. And that did take me a couple of weeks to sort of get to grips with. And obviously still upsets me.
It's not surprising to me that Marc Hatton was committing sexual offences against children at the same time that actually he was conning Christine, because here's a man who's totally ruthless. He gets what he wants, doesn't he? Regardless of what it is. He's quite happy to abuse people in an intimate way. So there are lots of parallels between the two offences. Although they're different, actually psychologically they're the same. This is a man taking what he wants without any thought for the person that he's taking from.
Hatton was found guilty of rape and sexual assault in May 2009. However, the sentencing was delayed until after the Crown Court trial for the callous and cruel con against Christine. And in February 2010, the trial began, and Hatton was pleading not guilty.
I was terrified of the thought of going to Crown Court, but at the same time, I realised that it was my chance to be able to stand up and say what was true. But it was the day that the jury went out to deliberate. I remember sitting outside the court thinking, oh my God, I'd fought so hard to bring him to justice, and if they didn't find him guilty, then all that effort, and that was a difficult moment.
On the 16th of March 2010, the verdict came in.
I just remember sitting there when the court clerk was asking them, how do you find him guilty on count one? I'm counting them 1, 2, 3, and it was just sort of like, oh thank God. They'd found him guilty on all 7 counts of deception.
Marc Hatton had been brought to justice for his Rothschild con and found guilty of 7 counts of obtaining money transfers by deception. On the 17th of March 2010, the monster was sentenced for all his crimes.
The judge sentenced him 15 years for the rape and 3 years for the fraud, so he was to serve a total of 18 years. This sentence was bigger than we expected.
I was surprised. It's a long time. But he got what he deserved.
With Hatton behind bars and the nightmare finally over, Christine Handy had to start piecing her life back together.
I think the most shocking aspect of this con is the very intrusive nature of it. Not only has this man tricked his way into this woman's home, he's tricked his way into her wallet and he's tricked his way into her heart.
It's so difficult to talk about it now because how you felt at the time and now realising it's a complete lie. It's just somebody walks into your life, just steals 3 years of it.
Christine estimates the full total that Marc Hatton cruelly took from her was in the region of £500,000. Since Hatton was declared bankrupt, Christine has only regained a tiny proportion of that money. But she did obtain one thing from him that she truly values.
My son's the only positive thing that's come from it. And I feel obviously very protective of him. Because I think he's been dealt a rough hand at an early age. And quite something to have to live with, isn't it? To grow up to know that your parent is such a person.
Christine Handy loves her son unconditionally, but his father, Marc Hatton, infiltrated her life, violating and abusing it from within.
I am a victim of a crime, but I don't have to behave as a victim. I'm obviously less trusting, but at the same time, I'm determined it's not going to make me cynical and bitter.
What can I say? Nick Gage, what a hound.
Nick Gage would live out his fantasies pretending to be a high-flying pilot in order to destroy the lives of the women who thought he loved them.
I never thought that just by meeting one person my life could be turned upside down.
He'd befriend them, he'd meet them on internet chat rooms and gain their trust.
Secretly romancing many women at once to make his money, for Nick Gage, love was the ultimate tool in his prolific conman career.
Oh, he's very cold and calculating, had almost double personality.
He was embroiling women in his own fantasy life.
Happy to go from one to the next, breaking hearts and emptying bank accounts.
Nick Gage was brought up in Bristol by his foster mother, and his early life is peppered with incidents of petty criminality. Nick Gage's first known con began in 2001, when aged 27, Gage contacted Stella Driscoll, a teacher from Kent.
I first met him via the internet, through chat rooms, and within probably a couple of weeks of, in fact, possibly even a shorter period of time than that, we had contact on the telephone very quickly within a matter of days.
The internet has been described as a new Wild West. It's the #1 tool for scammers now because it's an unregulated frontier, if you like. There's not really the same sort of institutions and rules and law that we have in the non-internet world.
Here was an opportunity for Nick Gage to contact women who he knew were interested in having relationships and basically mould himself into whoever he and they wanted him to be.
The internet proved to be the perfect hunting ground to source victims. After charming Stella online, it wasn't long until they met up for their first date, and Nick Gage appeared to be the perfect gentleman.
I remember meeting him off the train, and you know, everyone makes a certain judgment based on what you see in front of you to begin with, you know, tall, dark man, and very affable, very charming, and yes, he was romantic, he was sweet-talking, he was, without meaning to be cliched, I suppose, in many ways, what you would classify as a, you know, perfect kind of man, if you like.
He had the suits, the looks, to make people think that, you know, this was a successful aviation pilot in some senses who was, you know, a credible and genuine guy.
Nick Gage always presented himself to his many victims as a professional who worked in the aviation industry. With Stella, he was the former pilot who still worked with aeroplanes and airports.
There was a plausible reason that he put forward whether he was no longer a pilot and now worked for the Air Accident Investigation Bureau, but all within that same field.
I think the aviation theme was maybe used to attract females, basically. He probably saw it as something that, yeah, young ladies thought, oh, well, that's quite impressive. He's a pilot or something like that.
So I think that he probably wanted to be a pilot. You know, he went out and he got himself the uniform, but he was not that person in reality.
But the utterly fictitious career Nick Gage would present to his victims not only fulfilled his own obsessive fascination with aviation, It also meant he could manipulate and con multiple victims at once.
Well, Gage's interest in aviation was really quite convenient for him because it also gave him a great excuse, didn't it, for being away for long periods of time. So it enabled him to juggle several different women at the same time.
And the con worked. Soon after beginning his fraudulent fairy tale romance, Nick Gage rented a flat with Stella in Kent.
The decision to move in with me was pretty much a mutual decision. I was swept along with the novelty and the excitement and the feeling of being wanted, I suppose, and was willing to do that, to take those steps as quickly as it progressed. The first 3 months were smooth running, exciting, and it was what I suppose you would term as a whirlwind romance in that way.
Coming up, Stella's happy ever after with Nick Gage becomes a hell on earth that drives her to thoughts of suicide.
I remember thinking about putting my foot on the accelerator of the car and just driving into something.
Nick Gage conned multiple women by using the words "I love you" to ravage and annihilate their savings and their lives.
He was very caring, and I suppose that's what I liked about it, that he was interested and that wanted to know more.
He told his victims in these cases that he was an aircraft aviation pilot.
He basically used his wiles to manipulate women and fleece them for all they were worth.
In 2001, Gage had moved in with his first known victim, Stella Driscoll. Even during the couple's honeymoon period, the bogus aviation expert was living his fantasy life at the expense of the woman who thought he loved her.
There was always a plausible excuse why he couldn't pay the rent. I paid the rent for nearly a year in the end, and during the whole period where he wasn't able to finance anything in terms of day-to-day living or anything else, there was always a promise that money was going into my account. But it culminated around the 3rd or 4th month with my finances escalating so badly out of control. I actually remember the landlord coming to the flat on one occasion, and there I was again, potentially with my checkbook, almost feeling coerced to write yet another rent check out and looking at him as if to say, you know, if I do this, my finances are out of control as it is, then, you know, this is another step just too far. But him standing there, I think at the time, reassuring me that it would be fine and that within a matter of days the money would be in my account. And as uncomfortable and as stressed as I remember feeling at the thought of writing that check out, which I did, you know, I did write the check out, but you know, I was hanging on to the thread of hope and belief even then that the money would be going in my account within literally a matter of days. I mean, there were a whole number of other things that happened, including forging documents such as bank statements that would state that he had so much money in his account, although at the time I didn't realise they were fraudulent and very authentically drawn up, and would have taken a lot of energy on his part to ensure that they were as authentic as he could possibly make them, but now realise that that's exactly what he spent his energy and time doing.
Gage also forged letters from the NHS saying he was not well enough to work, and that his cash flow was affected because his work sickness benefit had not yet come through. And when Stella, who was in reality fully funding Gage's lifestyle, started asking questions and voicing her concerns, her conman lover proved adept at emotional blackmail.
I did confront him, and actually what I recall is his reaction was to turn that completely around and to make me feel as though I'd suggested something that was appalling. If you love someone and you know, you think you're emotionally involved, that I could possibly suggest anything. And so I was forced to hold on to the belief that, and never, you know, to the belief that what he was saying was true, and that he was just having a tough time getting this money that he had, I believe, from a previous employer that he was still waiting to come through.
Now clearly this man is a good con artist. They tend to be master emotional manipulators. They're very good at turning things, flipping them completely on their heads. He would say, well, don't you love me? You know, why are you accusing me of this? Why are you doubting me? Suddenly, he becomes the victim. So, a very clever ruse, a very clever way of using the emotional tie that the women had with him for his own profit, for his own gain, and just slithering out of those difficult questions.
I had various companies and so on kind of issuing threats and you know, in one or two cases, bailiffs. So I was dealing with everything defaulted, absolutely everything just spiraled out of control and defaulted. And I actually wasn't able to deal with that. I remember making a phone call into my workplace to say I could not come in the next day. I was, by this time, starting to become quite an emotional wreck. I didn't share any initial suspicions with anyone else because you don't like to think that, you don't think it's possible that somebody would go to great lengths to manipulate you to the point of, to the degree that I was manipulated.
But Stella's finances were hemorrhaging. Not only had her savings been eaten up, but she was now sinking further and further into debt. Reaching a point of desperation, and with still no sign of the money her lover had promised, an emotionally fraught Stella finally revealed to a close friend the desperate financial cycle she found herself in. And the friend turned detective.
This one particular friend ascertained that the premise on which this man had come into my life as somebody who worked as a pilot or as an air accident investigator was in fact not who he said he was, and then discovered that actually he was totally fraudulent in every way. Once everything was revealed, to be honest, part of the reaction from me was an alleviation of emotional strain and pressure, because I was in a state of confusion as to what was going on and why this money wasn't going through, and couldn't understand it, because for a long time I held on to the fact that what he'd said he'd done was sincere and that those actions had been taken. So, you know, when the days and the weeks rolled on and still money wasn't going into my account to address my finances, which were spiralling out of control, the stress of bearing that was just immense, to a point of envisaging putting yourself in a scenario that, let's say, people do envisage when you feel that desperate. I remember considering putting my foot on the accelerator. I remember thinking about putting my foot on the accelerator of the car and just driving into something, because of my feeling of utter desperation.
With the revelation came some relief in finally knowing why her life had escalated out of control. But with that came the knowledge that she had been conned in the cruelest of ways.
I had lived with a man, and I had lived a lie for that whole period from the very day that I met him. It had been all a lie, and dealing with the impact of realising that you've been emotionally conned was the first wave of realisation, and that was for some days and weeks and months to come very difficult to take on board in the first place, and then to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Well, imagine this, you've met the man of your dreams, and not only does it turn out that he's been unfaithful with, you know, several other women, which would be devastating enough, but nothing that he's said to you has actually been true, let alone the I love you part. And not only have you lost this partner in life, but you also then discover that you've lost all of your money, all of your savings. You're literally left with nothing.
Emotionally and financially devastated, Stella's friends supported her and went to the police on her behalf. Gage, who was lining up his next victims, was arrested and charged. On the 9th of October 2002 at Maidstone Crown Court, Gage was found guilty on 1 count of obtaining property by deception and 2 counts of using a false instrument, which is either credit card or cheque fraud. He was sentenced to a 2-year non-custodial communal rehabilitation order. Within a 6-month period, Gage had lied, cheated and conned Stella out of £17,000, leaving the teacher, still to this day, crippled with debt.
And the reality is that it is the financial position, the financial devastation, that is the legacy that I'm left with today.
The communal rehabilitation order failed. In the same year, Gage continued his con and once again targeted women online. After his vindictive manipulation of Stella was exposed, Gage moved on to Portsmouth and in 2002 began pursuing his next victim over the internet, Katie Bourne, a 26-year-old part-time student working to fund her studies.
I first met Nick Gage on the internet for an internet dating site. It was something that I'd never done before and something that I'll never do again. He sent me an email, I replied to the email, and for a good few months that's how we communicated, and he never wanted to push that. He didn't seem to be sort of saying, I want to meet you, I want to meet you. It was sort of very gradual and really just building up a friendship. Nick came across as being a very caring person. He came across as being somebody that was interested in you. He wanted to know about you. I suppose now, looking back on it, he wanted to know about you so that he could use that to his advantage, not that actually he was 100% interested. But he wanted to be able to he wanted to know what I was interested in, what I was doing, how I was. And so he was very charming, very caring.
If you meet somebody in a bar, for example, then there's lots of social cues that tell you a little bit about that person. Quite often you'll meet their friends, you know, you'll get a bit of an idea about the kind of person that they are, what they do, and you'll have bits of information verified about them. You don't have any of this on the internet. You just believe the information that you're fed. Then, of course, you meet up with that person, but you're meeting them in isolation almost, in a different kind of context to going out with your mates and chatting somebody up at a bar, and you go already thinking that you know something about that person, and it's quite possible that you don't know anything at all.
After a couple of months I thought, this is silly just being friends over the internet, so I let him have my mobile number and he rang me and we spoke to each other, and it was another month or so before we actually met. So it wasn't as if I'd got his name and address and sort of jumped into the car and met him as soon as I got it. I'd been really careful and I'd been really, really cautious about making sure that he was an okay person before meeting him.
Caution was not enough to save Katie from Gage's trap. He already had other women funding his lifestyle and so could play the patient, perfect would-be lover with his next target. I
felt like I was a special person to him. And I suppose any person is going to feel that they want to spend time with somebody that makes them feel special. He would open the door for you. He wouldn't barge past you. He would almost move your chair out so you could sit down. He was a gentleman. Make you feel like a princess. He'd make you feel like you were the most important person in the world. All the things that I suppose I looked for in a partner were things that he showed. Now, whether he gleaned that from me, from the conversations we'd had in the past, I don't know, or maybe that was part of his persona. But those feelings, I suppose, intensified very quickly, and I suppose we went through quite a whirlwind romance, if you want to put it that way, within the first month, because I suppose because he wasn't working, really, he did have the time to give to me. And I was on summer holidays, so I didn't have work either. And so we were able to spend a lot of time together. He said he'd just finished doing a big assignment, so he didn't need to work for a little while. And so I suppose if you're spending that concentrated time together, you do start to feel that you know somebody and that you're cared for, don't you?
And he was telling them, I love you. And they believed him. Well, why shouldn't they? Now you just think to yourself, well, what kind of hateful, callous individual can do this? I think that Gage was actually quite involved in his own fantasy here, and I think that actually the women who he was using in a cruel way, to him were just actors, if you like, on a film set.
Nick was very clever in the fact that on the second date he didn't turn and say, oh, I've forgotten my purse, I haven't got any money. He always had some money on him, and he was very generous to start off with, buying drinks and things. But as I said, I was quite strong-willed in the fact that if he bought a drink, I insisted on buying the next drink. I wasn't going to be paid for. But he was very generous. He'd turn up and say, I've got you a little present, and he'd bring out a teddy bear or he'd bring out a necklace and things like that. So just little things. Once
He'd gained their trust, and they certainly did trust him, and he was a credible man. Once that happened, he used that position to really go behind their backs and plunder their accounts and plunder their assets and use them for his own selfish motives.
Coming up, Gage not only cons and leaves Katie in £20,000 worth of debt, but he also frames her in his crimes.
You've been receiving the money that he's been obtaining fraudulently. And I looked at her and said, you're joking, I've not done anything like that. She said, I thought you might say that.
I think there's little doubt that Nicolas Gage can be described as a con man.
Nick Gage is the con artist who preyed upon women, claiming he loved them to gain access to their bank accounts. His heartless lies left a long trail of damage and devastation.
Nick believed what he was saying was the truth.
They were just there to prop up his fantasy and to finance his fantasy.
I have been totally duped by this man in every way.
And that's the ultimate confidence trick, is making someone fall in love with you.
Like with his previous victims, in 2002, Gage presented himself to Katie Bourne as someone who worked in the aviation industry. This time, he was a freelance aviation cameraman.
He was totally obsessed with planes. He used to spend hours sitting, and we spent hours sitting watching planes. And he said he worked for the CAA, which is the Civil Aviation Authority, doing cameraman work for if there was any security alert. And he said that quite soon into a relationship that he was on call for them, that there was something happening that he couldn't tell me about, but that he needed to stay near an airport. And so after that, our dates revolved around being sort of within 10 minutes drive of an airport, usually in an airport. I mean, he even sat, we were watching something on the news, and he even sat there and said, see that piece of footage? I filmed that footage. In a minute, X, Y, and Z's going to happen. And it did happen. Now, I didn't know that he'd actually watched the 1 o'clock news, and so that it was going to be the same on the 10 o'clock news, because I hadn't seen the 1 o'clock news, and I believed he'd been at work all day, so I didn't know that he could have watched it earlier. So there were things that he was quite convincing about. And I suppose if you're a professional, that's what you're doing, isn't it?
And echoing his previous cons, once the relationship was established, Gage soon began asking Katie for money.
After the first few weeks, month, He said that he'd lost his wallet, that he couldn't find his credit cards and things, and would I lend him some money to start off with, because he couldn't find his wallet, and that he'd reported it to the police and he'd had to cancel all his cards. So I lent him some money. It wasn't very much, I didn't have very much to lend him, but the odd sort of £10 went his way, and over a matter of time that just increased. He never usually came up to you and said, I need £100 and give it to me. There was always a reason, there was always a story behind it, there was always something that had gone wrong to him that made you feel sorry for him, that meant that you felt guilty if you didn't give it to him. He then said that he'd spoken to his accountant to do with his business, and that if I lent him a certain amount of money, then he would get his accountant to put it straight back into my bank account. And at first I was very dubious about doing that. I didn't have the money to give him. And he used very gentle emotional blackmail. Don't you trust me? I thought you said you cared about me. Don't you want me to succeed in my business? If we're going to have a future together, I need to build the business up. The money's there, but I just can't get at it. But if the money gets put into your account, you can give me the money. And so after sort of 2-3 days of having this constant, come on, if you care, you'll do this. If you want us to have a future, you'll do this. I agreed that I would give him the money, and I gave him my bank details so that the accountant could put it into my bank. And the next day, my card was refused. This is odd. Luckily I had some cash in my pocket, so I paid with cash, left feeling very embarrassed. I'd never had my card fail on me before. Rang him and he said, well, it's your own fault. I said, what do you mean it's my own fault? And he said, well, the bank details that you gave me, you got one of the digits wrong. And I said, well, I'm sure I didn't get the digits wrong. I'm mildly dyslexic. And so I thought, and he sort of said, well, you're dyslexic. Maybe it's because you've made a mistake with writing numbers down. I said, well, I don't normally have a problem with numbers, but okay, show me the piece of paper. He produced this letter from the accountant saying that the money had gone into my account, and yes, one digit was wrong. So I thought, well, obviously I have made a mistake. And actually that was our first major argument, because 2 days later he told me there's no way the money can come back, because if the person that the money's gone into doesn't agree for the money to be released again, then I can't have the money back. And he said, so it's your fault, you've lost it, you're not going to have this money. And I felt really, really bad about it, and then felt really, really stupid, and he made me feel really stupid, and basically said, it's your own bloody fault. If you'd not done it, then hadn't got it wrong, then you'd have the money and we'd both be okay. And that's how it all started, really. And then a bit later on he sort of said, that money, I've still got no money because you've lost it, can you lend me some more? Well, because I'd lost it, I felt that I had to give him some money, so I did give him some money, and then it snowballed from there, really.
Katie had given Gage £2,000 and believed she had left them both desperate for cash by her own mistake. But it was all lies. There was no accountant, no money, and no mistake. But the lies had worked. Gage now had Katie exactly where he wanted her.
The tactics that Gage used when women were getting a little bit disconcerted that this money that they were expecting from him just never seemed to materialise, are very similar to tactics used by men who are in relationships which are characterised by domestic violence. He managed to flip their concerns on their head and say to them, well, are you doubting me? You know, why are you doing this to me? Suddenly he became the victim. So he was very, very adept at using women's love for him, really, and using the emotional tie that they had to turn things around and to profit from that.
Nick was very good at using emotional blackmail. Nick was very good at making you feel guilty. He would be very good at turning the tables round so that you felt that the reason he was in a bad way was because of you, not because of him. But on the other side, he would make you feel like a princess on other days, make you feel special, make you feel like that he really did care, that he cared so much for you that he would do anything for you. And he'd do little things that made you feel so special. And I suppose that's what kept you with him, because on one day he'd be this wonderful, the perfect example of a partner, but the next day he would be gradually or slowly eating away at you with sort of guilt trips or making you feel very self-conscious about yourself. And so you could never feel like you're on a stable emotion with him. It was an emotional roller coaster. One day you were feeling really happy and really pleased about being with him. The next day you're feeling really guilty that you couldn't live up to what he wanted you to be and that he would almost be destroying your soul. So it was really a balancing trick that he had to keep you where you were.
Unbeknownst to Katie, Gage's balancing act was well practiced. His web of lies was working once again. He had no job, no money, and no scruples. But by December 2002, Katie was engaged to the conman, and there was no limit to the trauma he would put his so-called sweetheart through in order to make money.
He'd already proposed, I'd accepted, and one day I went out to choose a wedding dress, came back and found my house had been burgled, or our flat had been burgled, and that all my belongings had gone. My laptop, my TV, my CDs, you name it, all had gone. A year later I found out he'd done it himself and taken all my belongings to cash converters.
This really shows such a cold, calculating mind behind all that warmth and excitement about his engagement and wedding.
Despite cruelly and callously conning Katie emotionally and financially, his fictional persona as a freelance aviation cameraman not only gave him the opportunity to romance his other victims with the same story, but also made his monetary situation seem completely plausible.
So he would be working freelance for this media company, so he would be not earning a monthly wage, so his wage would come in dribs and drabs, so he'd get sort of £500 there, £300 here, £1,000 from somewhere else. He would put it in my bank account because he had my bank account details. I would then see the money in there, and so he was using my bank account to launder his money that he was getting fraudulently. But as soon as the money went in, I'd get a phone call saying, "Can you get me some money, please? I need it for X, Y, and Z." So I never benefited from any of the money that came into the account. It was always. And at the time, the reason it wasn't going into his bank account was because I now found out he didn't ever have a bank account. He'd told me that he'd lost his he'd lost his details for his account, that there'd been some problem with it. I think actually he told me there'd been some fraudulent activity on his account, that he couldn't use it, and that did I mind taking some of his checks for him. But a lot of the time it was that he owed me money.
Not only was Gage borrowing money from Katie hand over fist, he was also secretly using her credit card, stealing and selling her belongings, and setting up clandestine direct debits from her bank account.
I didn't have any credit against my name. I'd never had a credit card. I'd had one credit card, but that was one the bank had sent and I hadn't really used it. Turns out he'd been using that card and I didn't know about it. He'd found it in a drawer somewhere in my home, and he'd started using that. And then gradually bills started coming in that I had no knowledge of.
By 2004, Katie was still not fully aware of the extreme extent of Gage's duplicity, but was worried and suspicious, so she ended the 18-month romance.
Nick and I had been on off ever since then, but I was keeping contact, hoping that I'd get the money that he said that I'd get back from him. And really, it's a relationship, isn't it? So how can I turn up at a police station saying, "By the way, my partner's taken all this money"? How did he take it, madam? I gave it to him. It's not something you can go to the police with, is it? I'd found out about direct debits and things that were going in and out of my account, but how can I prove that I haven't done them?
PC Mark Bartleby Russell, who has to have his face concealed due to his current undercover work against terrorism, had however begun investigating Nick Gage because one of his victims had come forward. Gage had stolen £3,500 from his former landlady, Sally Rainsford.
Sally fell into the trap of he seemed like a nice, trustworthy man, and he would engage her in long conversations, gain her trust, and then once he had gained her trust, he would then start taking money from her by ways of deception, fraud, any way he could.
Around the same time, the extent of Nick Gage's con was becoming apparent to Katie, and she uncovered he had left her with debts of around £20,000. She desperately tried to find him, and her search led Katie to her fellow victim and Gage's former landlady.
I went down to speak to her at her house, and all his stuff was everywhere, and she turned around and said, "Katie, you need to go to the police." Turned out he'd stolen thousands of pounds from her, that she'd gone to the police about it. She gave me the details of the police officer in charge of the case and said, "I think you better contact him." I said, "Why do I need to contact him?" She said, "Because actually, if you look at all this paperwork, you're the financial director for a load of companies he's set up on the internet, and you've been receiving the money that he's been obtaining fraudulently." And I looked at her and said, "You're joking, I've not done anything like that." And she said, "I thought you might say that." He'd set up various businesses on the internet saying he was selling things. He had put me down as the financial director of the companies on the internet, so he was getting them to send him cheques in my name and then putting the cheques into my bank account.
Katie believed the money she was temporarily receiving from Gage was his freelance wages. They were in fact illegal gains he made from bogus online charities and eBay scams. He was promising to send goods, often stolen from his victims, including Katie. And on the surface, Katie looked like Gage's complicit partner in crime, and when she contacted the police, Katie had to convince PC Bartleby Russell of her innocence.
He confirmed that if I'd not come to the police and he'd not met me there and then, that he would have arrested me for fraud, that I was implicated in some of the things that he'd heard about and read about, and that he was glad that I was talking to them because otherwise it could have been quite nasty for me. Though he only decided that after he'd interviewed me quite vigorously.
And it took a lot of investigation, going over paperwork, talking to banks, until my colleague were convinced that she was actually being deceived and wasn't part or an accessory to the crime.
Although Katie had proven her innocence, she was still left with the earth-shattering realization that her relationship with Gage was a complete fiction, and he had used her love for him to plunder her account and leave her, a woman who had never used her credit card, in debt just short of £20,000.
I felt like my whole life had stopped, and I was constantly feeling sick. I felt very confused. I felt an absolute idiot. I was scared to talk to anybody. I was scared to go anywhere on my own. There was even a point where just going to work, I couldn't cope with being on the shop floor because there were people watching me. And I went and got help. That's all I could do. I went to the doctors. They gave me antidepressants. They also put me in touch with a counsellor.
The one comfort for Katie was Nick Gage's lie had finally been exposed. Unbelievably, Gage had been simultaneously conning multiple women at once, using his lies about working in aviation as an excuse to spend time with all of them, whispering, "I love you," and decimating their accounts and credit cards.
It turned out that I wasn't the only female, that there was 5 others, and we'd all had considerable amounts of money stolen from us. I was told by the police officer in charge that actually that I wasn't as badly off as some of the other women involved in the case. In some ways I thought it was just one big joke. How could somebody have 5 fiancés at the same time?
Coming up, Gage is finally brought to justice, but even then cruelly has the last laugh.
I was left with a picture of Nick leaving the courtroom, and he just turned around at me and smirked.
Nick Gage was a kind of love rat con man.
The press dubbed him the Casanova conman, as Nick Gage repeatedly wooed women and wiped out their savings, destroying their lives both financially and emotionally.
I still find it very difficult to trust people.
He gains their trust to the point where they will do anything for him.
I have no doubt in my mind that Nick would do this again.
Very few of his victims realised right until the end that he was a selfish confidence trickster.
By 2005, Gage was in police custody, and Mark Russell, who needs to have his identity concealed due to his undercover police work, had the pleasure of interviewing the compulsive conman.
After 4 hours, I can't recall any truth that came from that interview. He was convinced he was an airline pilot. He couldn't see what he had done was wrong at all. He had no remorse whatsoever for any of the female parties that he'd had liaisons with. From certain things he did disclose from the interview, I needed to investigate further. So he was actually bailed, police bailed. He was given his bail date. Not surprisingly, he didn't turn up, and so he was circulated on the police national computer as wanted. We eventually caught up with him at another female's address. I charged him with 26 different offences, and then I was able to put him straight up before the courts, where he was remanded in custody. I was ready for a very long trial. I had lots of evidence to present to the court. Suddenly, quite out of the blue, and a complete surprise to me, he changed his plea, which was a big relief for both myself and my colleague.
So now pleading guilty to over 20 charges, at the sentencing in the autumn of 2006, the true extent of Nick Gage's heartless con was unveiled.
When the case was outlined, it seemed that he was doing the same thing over and over again, and seemingly getting away with it, and then taking in young lady into his confidence, using them for what he needed, money and maybe a roof over his head, and then moving on to the next one. To start off with it, like I say, it was just a simple deception case that I really didn't think too much about. But as the facts became more apparent, and as it seemed that there wasn't just the one victim of his landlady, there was the ex-partner and the ex-partner before that, and then another lady with whom he'd had a relationship, it seemed that there was obviously a pattern, which the judge herself, said Gage was clearly a person who preyed on young ladies.
On the 29th of September 2006, Nick Gage was charged on 21 counts and was sentenced to 20 months in prison.
The judge said that she took into consideration the fact Gage had served 80 days in custody previously, and that was to go towards the sentence that he would serve of 20 months. This had the effect basically of meaning he would be free in 7 to 8 months. Which I think he thought was quite a let-off, and certainly his victims felt the same way about that.
The judge in the case actually said, I'm not going to award any compensation because I just believe if you have to start giving money back to these people, you'll only go and find another female to do it to, and that this is your chance to break the cycle. And so after that day, I was left not only with a lot of debts, but as I was left with a picture of Nick leaving the courtroom, and he just turned around at me and smirked, as if to say, there you go, I told you it wouldn't be that bad, I'd get out of it in the end. And off he went to prison, and I was left picking up the pieces.
Although this time Nick Gage was given a custodial sentence. While he was sent to prison, his victims were left with a trail of devastation and debt from his callous con.
He was very clever, and that's probably what made him so convincing. I'm not a stupid person.
But love is the biggest con of them all, isn't it? And I think that Nick was certainly savvy to this, and he took it just that stage further than most ever would.
Although conned emotionally and financially, Gage's victims have with time learned to live and to love again.
Trusting people is very difficult, but you can't tar everybody with the same brush. And so I am in a relationship now, and it is going well. But my partner now has had to tread carefully, like saying to me, I'll buy you X, Y and Z. I don't like that, because I feel that Nick used to do that, and it turned out he was using my credit card to do it.
I'm in a relationship at the moment which is fantastic, which is very strong, and so emotionally I feel that I've moved a long, long way, but the real legacy that's left is still the financial destruction that was caused. So the financial legacy is still left for me to deal with 7 years on.
I still pay £250 a month off on his debts, and I'll be paying that till 2009. I still won't be able to get a proper mortgage till at least 5-6 years after that, because my credit rating won't start improving till those debts are finished. Every decision I make is affected by what's happened in the past. So every day there is something that comes up that reminds me of what's happened.
He's a habitual criminal, he's a career criminal. I believe there are other women out there now who are going through exactly the same thing with Nicholas Gage. Now that he's been released, he's served his time in prison. He hasn't reformed, as far as I believe.
Nick is a wonderful bully. He knows exactly how to work people. His people skills are second to none. He knows how to wrap people around his finger. He knows how to get exactly what he wants out of them. And people to this day, if they're with him, will think that I'm lying, and he will tell them that, and they'll believe it till they actually wake up and smell the roses, because they will constantly believe what he's said, because he's so good at twisting the truth for his own means. And he'll be using emotional blackmail even though you don't realise it. And he will also be bullying you, but it'll be such gentle bullying to start off with that you don't even know it's happening.
Nick Gage is now walking free, and there is the fear he has returned to what he does best: lying, cheating, and conning.